Welcome to Crossing the Line, a special 12-part series of Kidsketch focusing on the interesting and culturally diverse San Diego-Tijuana region during the region's designation as the World Design Capital in 2024. Crossing the Line by Kidsketch introduces kids and adults to the benefits of sketching as a way of seeing, understanding, and appreciating the interesting world all around us. Crossing the Line welcomes a different guest sketcher each time, and today we have Lauren Lockhart, Executive Director of the La Jolla Historical Society. Lauren will tell us about her interest in sketching, and she'll also introduce us to the Case Study House program, a fascinating experiment that studied new concepts in housing design in the post-World War II era. And she'll also sketch the Case Study House 23C, located in La Jolla, California. Welcome, Lauren, and thank you for joining us for Crossing the Line. Let's start off by asking, why do you sketch?
Well, I sketch not because it's necessarily part of my day-to-day work, but it is an escape and something that I do to relax. It feels like a meditative process for me because I can just laser focus on one task. It forces me to look really closely at details, pay attention to how something, in the case of architectural sketching, how something is constructed and designed, and I really enjoy that process. It forces me to slow down.
You've picked a really interesting subject to sketch today. Why did you choose this building?
We chose this private residence that's called Case Study House 23C because it is a very important property, not just to La Jolla and to the Historical Society, but for its inclusion in part of the Case Study House program, which became a hugely influential program in terms of the development of modern architecture. But for our organization, the La Jolla Historical Society, this site is also deeply, deeply important to us. The owners, the Manow family, who have stewarded this beautiful home for more than 5 decades, have bequeathed the property to the Historical Society. So in the future, we have an incredible opportunity to share this home as a cultural resource and a learning center for anyone who's a fan of architecture and wants to learn more about the Case Study House program, but also more broadly, modern architecture.
Could you tell us more about the case study program? Who started it and when did it start?
Of course, it was essentially an experiment and a challenge that was proposed by John Intenza, who was the editor of Art and Architecture magazine. Um, and I say it was conceived of as a sort of challenge because Intenza put forth this idea that architects of the time should work to develop innovative, inexpensive, and easy to reproduce residential architecture. And this came about in 1945 in an effort to address the housing shortage following World War II. Ultimately, 36 different home designs were created. Only 24 of those were actually constructed, and there are only three located in San Diego. Case Study House 23C is one of those. It's part of what's called the Triad, designed by Edward Killingsworth. Killingsworth designed the Triad as a unit, these three homes on a cul-de-sac together, and they were finished in 1961.
Why were the case study homes so unique and influential?
The Case Study House program itself may not be as widely known if you're not an architect, studied architecture. I guarantee most of you have seen an image of the case of a case study house. That is largely due to the incredible photographs taken by famed architectural photographer Julius Schulman, or seen or been in a residential space that was highly influenced by these homes. And they really became emblematic of mid-century modern design, and they influenced residential architecture, everything that came afterwards. Some of the features, common features in these homes that we see today that were not common in 1945 when they were first proposed are features like open floor plans, the use of floor to ceiling glass, which we see beautifully used in Case Study House 23C. Flat roofs are another characteristic feature that wasn't as common. There's also an interest in blurring the lines between interior and exterior. We also see that illustrated so well in 23C, but we saw that in a lot of the case study house homes, and it's much more common today, again, than it was in residential design in the 40s. John Intenza, when he put forth this challenge to architects, he wanted them to demonstrate through these model homes that you could live in a really elegant, modern way that felt close to nature through this integration of interior and exterior, but not break the bank in doing so. He said that he was looking for the house that would be conceived within the spirit of our time, best suited to the expression of man's life in the modern world. So he really wanted these to be innovative, unique designs, but also easy to facilitate, easy to reproduce over and over again. Ultimately, that wasn't necessarily the legacy of the Case Study House program, but I do think the model is something that it's worth architects and designers and planners looking to. Are there ways that we can address the housing shortage that we're experiencing today through use of more common materials, through modular design? There's certainly some inspiration there that could help us to solve a continuing problem that we face.
You make some really good points, Lauren. And you've given us a challenge in a way, haven't you? Well, let's get back to the view that we're going to sketch today. You've picked an interior view, which is a little bit different for us. Can you tell us why you picked this view?
So we have chosen this particular view of Case Study House 23C for a number of reasons. We love the beautiful geometry of these repeated vertical lines that you see in this view. This is a photograph taken by a wonderful San Diego-based photographer, Philip Schultz Ritterman, who's done a beautiful job capturing the essence of this property. I also love that looking from this perspective, you're looking at the front door, this you can really see the effect of that blurring of the lines between indoor and outdoor here. That's going to be one of the fun challenges of sketching it, is it's a little difficult to tell which is the glass. Is there an open panel where you're looking straight out onto the courtyard and lawn outside?
Lauren, while we watch you sketch the view you've chosen for us, I want to thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your knowledge and insight into both the Case Study House program and especially Case Study 23 and the Triad C House, where you've allowed us some special insight into what it's like to live there. I love that you picked this interior view taken from inside the house looking out, and it helps to give us a feel for that indoor outdoor Southern California lifestyle you talked about. So thank you. We're going to sketch the house now, so hopefully you'll join along with us and we'll have some fun.
I would love to. It's been my pleasure. Thank you.
We are sketching in one point perspective today, which is the easiest form of perspective sketching there is. When we see in perspective, objects closer to us appear larger and objects farther away appear smaller. This view of the front door of the case study house is a perfect example. The door is the same height as the two walls on either side, but from this view, look, the wall here looks much bigger than the door, and the other end of the wall outside looks much smaller than the door. But we know that they're the same height. Let me do a quick overlay and show you what I mean. Here is the door. And the two windows on either side that can hardly see. And then there's this wall, this end of this wall, which is the same height as the door, but the front end of it, look how much taller it looks than the door itself. And then if we follow the wall back and we get to the back end of the wall, look how much smaller it is than the door. That's what perspective does for us. And if you can capture that perspective, your sketch will be so much more convincing. And when you add more of the features in the background and foreground, it's that much more convincing still. And you'll find these principles also apply to the floor and the ceilings, not just the walls. When I start a one-point perspective like this, I identify something that is flat, that I'm looking straight on. And in this case, it's the door and those two windows on either side of it. That forms the basis of our one-point perspective. If we can block that out correctly, we work from there. So let's start in the middle of our sheet and make the door, which is a rectangle. I'm going to use my pencil as a guide. I want to figure out the width and how many times the width equals the height. It looks like it's about 2.5, maybe 3. So I'm going to make a rectangle. Maybe just use your eyeball, start in the middle of your sheet. One of the things because I've sketched this a couple times, I keep tending to make it not tall and skinny enough. Now make 2 lines, the trim that's on either side of the door. And I'm holding my pencil loosely, I'm going slowly. You can go quickly if you want. It's how comfortable you are when you're making your lines. Also, how much time you have. When I'm out sketching it, I may not have time. I just start making lines and start scribbling. The next thing are the 2 side windows, and it looks like the width of those is about half the width of the door. You can use your measuring device, you can eyeball it. And then once you sketch them in, you can go ahead and change them, adjust them. That's what erasers are made for. Now let's locate the vanishing point. And if you think back about the demonstration I did at the beginning, the vanishing point is located sort of backwards, if you will. You look at your angled lines and you find, where do they all end up? They end up center of the door because when this photo was taken, the photographer was right at the center. And then the photographer's eye level is a little bit less than the halfway point of the door. Why don't we figure out where the halfway point of the door is? Let's make a really light X through our rectangle. I mean, you can guess at it, you can approximate it. If you would like a little help, which is useful when you're at the beginning of your sketching, using a couple of tools to help you with your accuracy, find that midpoint. Okay, so if that's the center line, come down just a little and make another dot. That's your vanishing point. So let's find the bottoms and the tops of these side walls. I'd like you to take your straight edge again, and we're going to connect the vanishing point to the corner of the windows, all 4 corners. And make a light line all the way out. Remember, this is what Lauren did too. She did the floors first, and then she did the tops of the walls. I was pretty impressed. She wasn't using a straight edge to help her with her projection lines. There. And then from there, she made a horizontal line right through the whole thing. That is the eye level line, the horizon line. Let's do that step again. So these side walls are in perspective, and that means we see them as angled. To get the bottoms and the top lines of those walls, we start back at the vanishing point. Either freehand or using a straight edge, make an angled line that runs from the vanishing point out through the lower edge of the window. Now do the same on the other side. Those are the bottoms of the walls. And take those lines out to the edge of your sheet, and remember to keep those lines light enough to erase later. So for the tops of the walls, we're going to do the same thing. We go from the vanishing point and run that line out through the upper edge of the window, first one side and then the other. Now make a horizontal line that runs through that vanishing point, and that becomes your eye level line. It's also called the horizon line.
All right, now we're going to find the fronts of the walls and the backs of the walls. To do that, we're going to rely again on referencing what we've already sketched. The tricky part about drawing something in perspective is the foreshortening. This looks like the wall comes way out at us, but you might be surprised to know that that wall comes out not that much. About the width of the window is about the width of the wall that we're seeing. So go ahead and make a line. Oops, I might have made it even a little narrower. Go ahead and make a vertical line that connects that projection line. Do another one on the left. I'm making it a little bit less than the width of the window. While we're out here on the front, let's make the thickness of the wall. There's going to be a second line just to the side of it. And I'm going to connect it with a horizontal line like that at the bottom and a horizontal line like that at the top. And then I do the same thing for this wall over here. I make a line to the right of it. Why have I made this line all the way across like I'm making a square? It's because the front of the walls need to line up so that your sketch looks, so it doesn't look askew. All right, so we have the front of the wall. Now, how about the part of the wall that we see through the window? How far back does it go? If we look at the width of the window, we see that that wall goes not halfway, a little more than halfway the width of the window. So if you find sort of the center of that window, go back a little closer to the door and make a vertical line. Remember, in perspective, things farther away are smaller and things closer to us are larger. And so even though the wall back here is the same height as the wall back here, this leading face of the wall is a lot taller than the back visually. All right, let's make that one there. I'm going to scoot this line over just a little bit. I want more of that fence in the background to show through. So this is the nice thing about starting in pencil is you can adjust your lines. Now we've got those walls.
They're floating in midair, so let's give it some ground and that back wall. Before we do that, let's add the doorknob. We'll be able to find the ground easier after we add that.
If this is our vanishing point, our doorknob, it's not quite halfway down. So I'm going to come over here, I'm going to make a little circle, a little bit down, over like that. I'm going to make that ground plane behind it, just below where I put the doorknob. I see it through the window. I don't see it through the wall. I'm going to continue that line out. And I want to make sure that it's level, left, right. Every time I see it through the window, I want to add it. The next line I'd like to add is this front line here. That grass line looks like it lines up with the end of the wall. So where these back corners are, make another horizontal line. They should line up. If they don't line up, adjust your sketch a little bit. All right, now we've got that grassy area sort of blocked out. These two areas are the carpet. This is that tile area that runs all the way through. Let's add the fence at this point and the ceiling. Okay, so the ceiling comes down just a little bit. It's kind of interesting. You see where this point is, where the wall ends? I want you to go up just a little and make a horizontal line. And you're saying, but that's not where those lines come together. That's right. If you look real closely, see how that wall continues up? Because that wall's going past that roof overhang. We're going to make a little vertical line like that and erase it. So now we have that ceiling in here. Why don't we put the ceiling in the living room and the dining room? Here's something interesting to note. The ceiling in the entryway is higher, or at least it doesn't go out as far as these two. So come down about a pencil width and make another pair of horizontal lines. On the left side, it's the living room, and the right side, it's the dining room. All right, now we can put the top of the fence in. The way I see it, where the ground is and that ceiling in the entryway, about halfway is the top of that wall. So I'm looking here to here, find about the halfway point, and make a horizontal line, and I think that's the top of the fence. At least it's going to be the top of the fence in my sketch. There's something else about my sketch that I want to do. This is a nice rectangular image, and it's an attractive proportion. We see a lot of the yard, but I've only got so much patience for this sketch, so I'm going to make more of a square sketch. I just want to concentrate on the door, these two walls, and maybe a little bit about what's happening out here. So I'm going to just start lopping off my sketch. If you sketch with us a lot, you've seen me do this. I will put a border around my sketch just to tell myself I'm not going to worry about this other stuff. I usually try to sketch a little smaller just so I don't have to keep sketching quite so much. The next thing I want us to do is the floor. Remember from our demonstration, the joints between the tiles follow the same rules of perspective as we just did with the walls. What I'd like us to do is to take this line, this ground floor plane line, and divide it equally. So we're going to put a mark right in the middle. Divide that in half. Divide that in half again, and half again. So I've got eight sections. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I'd like dividing it equally so I can see what I'm doing. Now I'd like us to go from the vanishing point and radiate out through each of these lines, just like we did with the walls. Very nice and lightly. And while this may seem kind of tedious, it really gives you a convincing sketch because everything is going back to the same vanishing point. I think I might cut my sketch off even closer here. Got a lot of busy lines going on. Feel free to erase some of these in the door itself if you'd like to sort of cut down on the noise.
Now I'm going to introduce a cool trick for making those tiles even more convincing in perspective. It's one thing to sketch evenly spaced, radiating lines of the tiles in perspective, but it's altogether another challenge to show how the tiles are getting smaller the farther back they go. So here's a little trick that I know on how to get those tiles to look convincing, even in perspective.
I'd like you to take your piece of paper, your straight edge, start at the corner of the window here, and just draw a diagonal line that goes out to this front leading edge, wherever you put the front of your sketch.
Let me do it again. Start with your straight edge in that lower corner where the glass and the floor meet there on the left, and then draw a diagonal line down and to the right. This will work in the other direction. You can start upper right and go to the lower left. In this case, we went upper left and went down to the lower right. Draw that diagonal line. Now for the horizontal tile joints.
Make a horizontal line where the line intercepts, your diagonal line intercepts your radiating line. And do the same thing with the second line. Same thing with the third line. What you're going to notice is the lines are getting, as they're coming towards you, they're getting farther apart, which is as it should be, because things that are closer to you appear larger, and things that are farther away from you appear smaller. You can do the same thing as you go farther back. You know, these lines are so light in the background. I would recommend just making a series of lines that just get closer and closer and closer together like that. But we don't need to be that accurate. Let's just make them nice and light like that. All right, now let's have some more fun the tiles themselves. This pattern that the tiles are set in is called a running bond. That's where they take one row of bricks and they offset them by half a brick. Do you see that? So the first and the third row line up, the second and the fourth, the even numbers line up. So let's start on the outer edge, just because it's closer to us. These are our brick paving tiles.
I like these bricks because they really emphasize that indoor-outdoor continuity.
Other rows are going to be halfway like this. But what I know from experience is it might be a really good idea if you were to do another set of very light lines at those halfway points. Our tendency is to forget about the perspective and make a line that's just sort of straight up and down. So let's do this to control our lines, just to be on the safe side, let's say. I know, a lot of radiating lines. And if you'd like to skip this part, go ahead and skip this part. I'm just showing you some tricks. If it gets confusing, just go ahead and sketch them any which way you'd like. All right, so that second row then, the tiles will be like this. And I've learned from experience that I kind of need to do it a course at a time, because if I don't do it a course at a time, I get confused and I mess them up. So what you're going to want to do is go back in and start erasing where the lines don't belong. That means this first row, the third row, get those lines out of there so you don't confuse yourself. Then the fourth row matches the second row. Why do I like to do this? It's just that I guess this is one of those things that I always found was fascinating, was to see things like the brick texture in a sketch. And so I'd go to the extra trouble to put it in there. Now, as we get farther back, we can maybe just do every third or fourth brick. What we'll wind up doing when we get to the pen part is I'll show you how to give just a hint of it without having to do every single line. And then they would have lined them up outside that same way. What we'll probably do for the outside is just have a couple that flick a little bit like that. But we'll get to that part. Let's pay attention. Let's take away a few of the extra lines that might be confusing us. Let's get back to our just plain slab door. We're going to eventually come in with the pen and we're going to make these vertical lines that's part of this paneling. And I'm not going to do anything that, I'm just going to use my eyes to start them farther apart at the beginning, and then they get closer and closer the farther away they get away from us. And then on the outside, there'll be very light lines, just some hints like that, because the light is catching them and we don't see it as much. There are the horizontal lines in the ceiling. Again, I'd like us just to, I'm starting at the door, I'm coming out toward us, and I'm just making them a little farther apart each time. Notice I forgot to do the beams that run through here that separate the entryway from the living room and the dining room. We'll just make those projection lines like that. It's on the far side of that wall. Outside, it's interesting, they're almost darker outside. I think the light is bouncing around. Just, they get closer and closer the farther away they go. They all look sort of uniform though, don't they? There we go, and then a few more up here in the foreground. Stop your sketch wherever you'd like. There's a pattern in the ceiling, and if you'd like to do that pattern, it's the same thing we did down here. You know, if I were to, what's the best way to show how to do this? If I were to Make some equal marks right here. And I take those lines back to the vanishing point. I'm not going to take them all the way back to the vanishing point. I think I got the hang of it this time. And just make them light. I can hardly see these other lines as they get farther back, so I'm just going to do a couple like that. And then the same over here, I'll put them about the same distance apart as I did on the other side.
In this house, the ceiling is nowhere as important as the brick because it doesn't contribute to the indoor-outdoor effect. So if you want to play it down, and because the lines are so subtle, go ahead.
And then make these lines light and just getting closer and closer as they get farther back, like that. These I didn't make going, they need to get a little closer together. Most of the rest of what we have to do is not in perspective. There's this wall back here and these trees. Would we like to do these trees? What's interesting is the original planting, there were a lot of old olive trees that were planted. These are pines. But let's look at before we get to the trees or deciding if we're going to do the trees or not, let's do these wooden panels that we see through there. There's a vertical line that we see just in this window. Go ahead and make that vertical line. If you want to, go ahead and shade in that little area. And the reason I say that is it's helping for us to show what's dark in the background and in the foreground. That wood panel goes all the way over to the other side of the fence here. I'm going to make it right about here. Make some little lines like that. Do the same thing on the other side, because remember this is a symmetrical. We've been ignoring these two little columns that are in the living room and dining room. Find the ceiling right there. There's that 10-foot point. Just to this side of the wall is a column. Make two lines close together. Come down to the floor. Erase anything that you might have in the middle. And then you'll notice that we see this column in perspective. So just inside here, make another line very close together. Same thing over here. Oops, I went crooked. And then just inside, another line, because we're just sort of seeing the side of it. And then erase whatever's in there. I see that there's some planting on the other side of the fence. I'm going to make just some squiggly lines like this that says there's planting over there. It's going to help our drawing, our sketch have some depth to it. This side goes up a little higher. You see the bushes. Now Lauren put those trees in there. But you know, I think I'm going to skip the trees. Sorry, Lauren. I'm going to skip the trees. I'm going to shorten my sketch. I'll lop off some of this stuff. I know that the planting outside is important. It's that indoor-outdoor connection. But on the other hand, I've only got X amount of time for my sketch. Let's see about putting in, we see a little area back here. I'm going to make a diagonal line. That's the edge of this grass area. It shows that there's patio and stuff out there. I'll do the same thing on the other side. The edge of that grass area follows the rules of perspective. Before we start inking, I almost forgot the important art pieces. Let's locate them. This tile is going to give us a really easy way to locate them. Look at the foot of each of those sculptures. They're sitting on the floor. It's square. It takes up 2 courses of the brick, and it's about 1 brick wide. So come back over to where your brick paver is, and make a square shape following the rules of perspective. Do another one to the other side. Okay, it's got a little lip. So I make another set of lines just above it. This one has a little lip. We want to not get too much detail because then our eye will get lost in there. Don't want to attract too much attention. So make the verticals. If you've got it located correctly, that vertical sort of clear, that acrylic is in front of the wall on the outside. And if you have to scoot your sculpture over just so that that wood behind it is there, go ahead and do so. Oh, look, I've erased our doorknob. All right, the top of the clear portion is a little bit above the doorknob. So make your part there, and then there's this part which is solid, and then we'll get to the part that looks like a C or a crescent moon. And just for proportions, that crescent moon stays completely within the wooden wall behind it, meaning it doesn't encroach too close to the door. There, I'm making a bunch of lines here, but we'll clean it up. And then there are these three little, they look like candlesticks, but I think they're some sort of resin. Do the same thing on the other side. It's sort of a C, crescent moon. Three little funny things that look like candlesticks. Okay, and then when the time comes, we will darken these in. They may be difficult to sketch if all you were doing was sketching them by themselves, but they're easier now that we've got everything else in because we just relate it to what we've already got. A little bit above the doorknob, centered on the wall beyond. And now we can start inking. I've got my favorite Pilot rolling ball, extra fine. I'm going to retrace my steps. Let's start with the door. If you need to make some adjustments, now's a good time. I'm just outlining everything first. We usually, when we're doing sketches, we block out the lines and the shapes. Then we get into tonal values, shade and shadow. Detail, tonal values, shade and shadow. Here I'm adding a little detail early, just because it's fun. Top of the window glass, top of the wall. In whatever order you want to do these. I'm going to go ahead and do the wall now, front of the wall. But I'm not going to show the paneling just yet. I want to do that later after I get this all blocked out. And then I'll do a light line here where the glass is. Remember, it's just a single line because there is no frame. The glass is embedded in the floor and in the wall, which is why maintenance is so difficult. If one of these breaks, they have to remove some of the siding and some of the ceiling and the flooring to reset the glass. Whereas with normal windows, if a window breaks, they don't have to take the window out. They take out a piece of the frame, reset the glass, put the trim back in. All right, the front of the wall here lines up left and right. Make a line, that's the edge of the carpet. If you wanted to make some little dashed lines or squiggly lines, that's the edge of the carpet, you could. We're not going to do much for the carpet though. When we get out to that detail part, I can show you some things we could do. Yeah, might as well put the window, the artwork in, even though we sketched it out last. So don't forget it again, there's the art. Definitely this clear part of the art, I'll just do a series of dots. My pen is running a bit out of ink. Manos really love modern art, and their house has got some very interesting pieces, and they like to support local artists, I believe Lauren had told me. Okay, let's continue with some of the other parts. We've got the front walls, back walls. Now let's do some of the horizontals. The frontage in the living room. Well, do that horizontal, but let's add this column now. Again, rather, there's no right or wrong or how you fill this in. It's however you want to. So I'm starting with the floor. I added the column. I'm doing the ceiling. Going up and doing that ceiling beam that I keep forgetting to do. I do my sketch, which I keep making smaller and smaller. It's fun with a sketch like this to then eventually erase all your lines and see what shows up. All right, and I have it the fence in the back. Doing where the fence hits the ground, and I'm lining it up left to right. Top of the wall, lining it up left to right. I'll add those little darker areas, but I won't color them in just yet. I'm going to save that part for last. Right on the ground. I will make some squiggly lines at this time, which is the landscaping that we see beyond the property line. Well, actually, it's just on the other side of the fence. Just on the other side of the fence is that shared driveway between, this is Triad C. Triad B is on the other side, and they shared a drive. How about if we lighten up some of these lines before we go into adding more detail and tonal value? I'm just going to lighten them a bit, because if I lighten too much, then I won't be able to see where I put all my lines. And let's do the tile on the floor. This is where you're going to want to be careful not to put too much emphasis. With our pencil, we showed a lot of detail. So what I'd like us to do is start out on this outer row that's closest to us and go ahead and put a line around each tile like that. And if you go quickly, like start in the corner and make a flick like that, it will make for a thinner line. You could do a couple of the lines where you go slow with your pen, but if you mix up the speed at which you sketch these, you'll get some variety in your lines, and you kind of want that. It's a playfulness out here. The second row, remember, is offset. In the foreshortening of these rows, we start to lose detail the farther back we get. So we're keeping our detail here in the first couple of rows, and then as we get back, we'll get sketchier and sketchier. But notice how these lines, we still see sort of two, and it's the horizontal lines that start to really fade. And so if If you don't get every side of the tile as you go back, that's good. That's what you're supposed to do, is start doing fewer and fewer edges. And actually, you probably lose patience, which is perfectly fine, and then you just want to do what they call a vignette, is the tile just starts to dissolve the farther away it gets. And maybe you just do these in joints randomly. I found that the detail that shows up in my sketching is just really dependent on how much patience I have that particular day that I'm sketching. If it were a rendering, that's a different story. You need accuracy, but sketches, it's the beauty of them. What do you want to capture? What do you have time for? And as we get back to these back rows, instead of 2 rows in the horizontal direction, you might get just 1 row. Again, because of foreshortening, you're just seeing whatever side of the tile is a little bit higher. Great. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the ceiling next. If you do a series of just sort of flicks like that, especially outside, you get less of a line. Inside, I might be a little more deliberate because we're not seeing it, it's not faded through the glass. And then remember, they get a little farther apart the closer they get to us. And that's because the spacing between these lines gets bigger. All right, now the verticals. So I'm going to use the vertical lines to help with our tonal values. So I might be putting the lines closer together than they actually are here, but that's part of the tone. That's part of, it's a darker wall. And so I'm going to put them closer together to sort of emulate the darker wall. Oops, that one got farther apart. Practice will help with things like all these lines that are so close together and evenly spaced and freehand, but surprisingly parallel. And what I'm going to do is try to make lighter lines on the outside and kind of break them up a little like this. Maybe while I'm here, I'm going to darken in a few things and see how my relationships are working. Do I have the outside light enough? Do I need it darker? And by darkening the stuff that's on the inside, I can see how my relationships are looking. And I'm going to make a series of very close together vertical lines for the trim on the door. You can go any way you want. We're not trying to show texture, we're just trying to show solid. And then the one thing I was thinking about doing is maybe a series of horizontal lines for the front end of this. You could also do some dash lines, but we're trying to shade it in, and I want it to look different than the wall around the corner. I'm making it a little darker at the top and at the bottom. This is one of those times if you wanted to turn your book, it's probably a little easier. But since I'm hoping that you'll follow me, I'm leaving my book straight. It's easier for you to see. I don't know if I love that these horizontal lines like this, but like I said, I'm trying to differentiate that it's the end of the wall, it's straight out at us. All right, I am definitely out of ink. One of the reasons I tend to sketch smaller is so I don't have to spend so much time filling areas in. This sketch I just kept getting bigger and bigger. I think I started with my rectangle a little big. I need to really remember the concept of a thumbnail. It's smaller. All right, and then the outside. See how it's almost the same color of the sky. So if you want more contrast, you could just add a few more lines on the inside. Lauren did a really nice job of trying to add a little more shade. It's like a little shade once you get inside here, and you kind of see it around the door. It also appears on the floor, so if you wanted to add a few extra lines, and see how the shadow, well, I guess it seems to come in a little bit, or the farther away it gets from the door, it gets a little more in. I'm not going to do too much. It's a cloudy day. The shadows aren't that pronounced. I'm just going to give it a hint. Like that. Okay, then this other side. I definitely have more ink in this pen. Maybe that's what was the problem on this side. All right, and then this door jamb. Let's add a few tonal values outside here on that outer fence. What I like about that fence is that layering effect really gives us depth. You can tell that that's off in the distance. It's smaller, that rules of perspective aren't letting us down. It's added interest. Maybe do a few lines. Suggesting if you flick them a little bit, they have less importance. They're just sort of up there. Let me add the dark areas on this artwork on the left. And the one on the right has a little bit of white showing through, and I really like it to be solid. think that gives the sketch more punch, is to get these areas nice and dark. The next thing is to take an eraser and get all the pencil marks off. And then you'll find those areas that you've skipped over that you want to go back and add the ink to, but you're also going to find some areas that you skipped over. It adds to the character of your sketch. It's really nice. And you won't need to add the ink back in. I think I'm never going to get that vanishing point off of the door. Now we're ready to add some color. I want to do something a little bit different when we add color to our sketch, and that is I'd like us to go back to 1960 when this was a reflecting pool. And so instead of shading it in green, I'm going to shade it in blue. I know it's a cloudy day in our reference photo, but I'm going to make it a sunny day. And so I'm going to take these areas of sky and I'm going to make them blue. This is a pretty bright blue. I'm going to do it light at first and see how I want to darken everything in afterwards. So I'm just going to hit everything with a layer of blue that I want to have blue. So there's our sky. And then the reflecting pool. So if you see it, let's see, in water, it's usually sort of a horizontal, there are a series of horizontal lines. The reflecting pools were not that deep. I don't know how deep they were. 6 inches, a foot.
This is a great time to point out how invisible the barrier is between inside and outside. Remember, we're looking through 10-foot tall panes of glass, and it's like nothing is there because there is no window frame. It's a really cool concept and cool effect.
I might take another different blue and hit it again, see if I like that blue better. And then also just give it a little more depth, which gives our sketch a bit more punch. You can leave this grass, of course. If it's a reflecting pool, we might do a little darker around the edge as if we're seeing shadow on the side. I like that blue much better than the one we started with, so I think I'll use it also for the sky.
This back wall and the punch of blue in the sky really helps to give our sketch depth. And the layering effect adds a certain dynamic feel. It's a really interesting view. And it wasn't until the sketch is just nearing being finished that depth and dynamics really is coming out. If you have a terracotta colored pencil, it might be kind of fun to add a little bit of a hint of color there on the tile. Again, because it's such an important indoor-outdoor feature, might be nice to address it.
I'm doing specific tiles up in the foreground, and then when we get farther back, the whole thing will be shaded in. And then outside, notice how there's a lot of light outside, so it's going to get a lot lighter. And then right at the door is where it gets a little darker. And that helps. There's no window frame to tell us that we're inside or outside. That was sort of the beauty of this style of architecture, the flow from inside to outside. So it's just a little bit of color right here to suggest we're inside now. The lighting is different. My pencil's a little redder than the terracotta. Certainly looks a lot more orange outside. Add some green to the plants beyond. If you don't have a green, I'd probably shade them in black. Use a series of cross-hatching to hit the plants. Case study house. It's Triad C. Hoya. And whatever date, so you can remember years to come.